Step aside, J-horror. There's another Asian player with a fresh take on horror. We're looking at Korean horror films on the Horror Movie Syllabus. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Horror Movie Syllabus. My name is Professor Victor, and I'll be your host as we go through all of the essential, noteworthy, interesting, and downright notorious modern horror films. If you're new to the channel, I recommend you check out our introduction video. I leave a link to that in the description below, and it'll explain a little bit about how the horror movie syllabus works. But in short, we look at a particular subgenre of horror and then examine 3 particular examples of that subgenre. And today I am excited because what we are talking about is Korean horror movies. Now, Korean horror movies have been permeating the horror genre for the last 10 to 20 years and probably even earlier, but they've only really started to be making any noise in the last few years. And I'll be honest, that's kind of when I jumped on the train to appreciating them as well. Like the J-horror trend of the late 90s that we discussed in our J-horror video, Korean horror seems to have kind of hit really hard in America at a time when we're hungry for something fresh and original, something different than what we've been getting in the past. And the reason why the Korean horror movies have clicked so well with American audience is, in my opinion, because that fresh take is something incredibly original and uniquely Korean. Now, if you've watched some of the other videos, you've maybe seen me mention Korean horror movies in some of the other subgenres. And when I do, I usually wind up talking about how those movies wind up mashing genres or kind of a blend of a bunch of different kind of genres. And that to me is what's the most representative aspect or key ingredient of Korean horror. It's not just horror. It's hard to categorize or describe what the movie is because it's doing drama and horror and comedy and action all together, blended in a way that is hard to separate it out one from the other, or even really to say that one of those genres dominates over the others. And I think that's what has encouraged American audiences to respond to Korean horror or even Korean cinema in general. It's just that it's a fresh take. It's something that we haven't seen before here. Our movies tend to be a little siloed off. They tend to be exactly what they are. If you're seeing a Fast and the Furious movie, you know what that is. There are, of course, exceptions to the rule. I mean, Quentin Tarantino's made an entire career of blending genres, but with Korean horror, it does seem like that formula is uniquely Korean. Everything is put together, but it's in such a well-balanced and blended manner that it just seems to be its own thing. In fact, that's why I like to refer to Korean horror as just Korean. That is the subgenre. I mean, we have a lot of foreign horror on the horror movie syllabus, but in this case, not unlike the new French extremity, the genre or the subgenre seems to be uniquely of this region. And kind of like J-horror, it has its own tropes, its own feel, but it's really hard to zero in on what that is. I'm hoping that by looking at the examples we're going to look at today, it'll become a little bit clear. The more Korean horror you watch, the more you get to understand what Korean horror is. And I recommend you watch as much Korean horror as you can, because the movies we're going to talk about today are exceptional. I've been very excited to get to this video because I love these movies. As usual, we're categorizing them undergraduate, graduate, and postgraduate. And in this case, they're going to be in the order of which I like them, but I don't want that to confuse you or lead you astray. Every single movie that we're going to talk about on this video, including the extra credit videos, is amazing. Every one of them. So when I'm putting them in order of how much I like them or how good they are, I'm splitting hairs. The difference between these movies in terms of quality or in terms of how much I have affection for them is so razor thin that it's almost irrelevant. But I'm keeping the format alive. I'm putting them in an order just to put them in an order. But I love every single movie that we're talking about on this video today. So enough teasing you with it. Let's go ahead and jump into the movies. The first movie we're talking about today, our undergraduate level selection, is The Wailing. The Wailing came out in 2016, and it's a perfect place for us to start off in terms of illustrating that blended genre format that Korean horror uses so well. It takes aspects of drama, comedy, horror, uh, police procedural, mixes it all up and presents something that feels unique and strange and wonderful. If you haven't yet had the chance to see it, The Wailing is a movie about an investigation into a killer by local police. And there's this mysterious Japanese man that has shown up in town, and he's the prime suspect. I, as usual, don't want to go into it too much because I don't want to spoil anything for you if you choose to see this. And by all means, you should choose to see this if you haven't already. But suffice to say, there is a large focus on police procedure and investigating these crimes, but there's also a very prevalent supernatural bent to the story. Now, you've seen this combination in other movies in the past, and I usually feel like it winds up being either a jarring mishmash or one of these things kind of takes precedent over the other. But in this movie, it's seamless. It works together really, really well. And I don't know if that's a cultural thing. I don't know if there's more of a belief in the supernatural, if it's more accepted in Korean culture than it is here. But it does seem to be a prevailing theme in this movie that the supernatural is something that is possible and needs to be taken somewhat seriously. And that's a big part of what makes The Wailing so intriguing. There's a lot of discussion about faith versus logic and belief in the supernatural versus the very real possibility of a man-made monster, if you will, that makes this a really interesting exploration into crime, murder, horror. It's a fascinating take on this, and you know maybe if you're Korean and you're familiar with the culture, maybe it's not quite as interesting, but to an American who has little to no real experience with Korean culture, this is fascinating stuff. This is an intriguing and fresh take on what would otherwise be a rather tired genre. You know, police investigating a killer. We've seen that a million times, but you've never seen it like this if you're only used to American cinema. And that's what makes this movie in particular and Korean horror in general so exciting. The other thing about this movie that I really like is that the character of the Japanese man is fascinating because there is a race angle to be explored in this movie, and they do explore it. And that's neat from an American perspective because, frankly, we don't really think a lot about the race relations between different Asian cultures. And that is a very prominent plot point in this movie. And that was interesting to see. It was interesting to see the racism taking place in this culture versus another culture that's very close by. But something that for Americans, we just kind of look at Asia as a whole and don't really separate or distinguish between the different cultures. So that's also another thing that makes this movie feel very fresh, very interesting, very exciting. Another aspect of this movie to mention is the acting and performances, which, by the way, across the board, excellent. It's neat because the performances veer back and forth, like from comedic and maybe over the top to like maudlin and melodramatic to just really poignant, dramatic performances. And it just weaves back and forth amongst these different tones seamlessly. Like the movie should make your head spin because it seems like it's hilarious at one point and then like ridiculously over the top at another point and then just like really hard hitting, profoundly sad at another point. And all of it works. It's just balanced so well that your head doesn't spin. You're along for the ride. You're not sitting there trying to feel like, oh wait, I was just watching a comedy and now I'm watching a drama. You're right in that moment. Every time that the mood shifts, you don't notice it because you're just kind of going on this journey and you're in the moment at that time. So while you were laughing a little while ago and now you're shedding a tear, it all seems like it makes sense. And again, that's the magic of Korean cinema, is that it can just weave and bob through all of these different genres so effortlessly and without upsetting or throwing the audience off. It's masterful. It really is something that I don't see a lot of in American cinema. Like I said, there are a few examples of it, but by and large, that's not what we do here. But they do it in Korea so well, and it's what makes it feel so fresh and exciting. One last thing I'll mention about this movie is that the cinematography and the camera work is absolutely beautiful. And this will be a theme that's echoed throughout pretty much every movie that we're going to talk about on this video. Korean movies just look fantastic. There's a pacing to the shots that is. It's hard to explain. I want to use the word languid, but that is maybe overstating it a little bit. That'll make it sound like everything is really slow, and that's not the case. You'll notice a lot of these movies tend to be a little bit on the long side, but they won't feel long to you. The movies move along, and The Wailing is no exception to this. It moves along, even though it's a slow paced movie and it's a slow burn. You're not gonna feel. You shouldn't feel uh, bored, or you shouldn't be looking at your watch because you'll be engaged. And I think again part of that has to do with how it moves back and forth between genres, but also it's just a beautiful thing to look at. So even when the movie's taking its time, it's giving you something amazing to look at. As you can see, this movie in particular and the subgenre as a whole is something that I'm very effusive about. And I think if you take the chance of looking at one of these movies, you'll be able to see why. And I think that The Wailing is not a bad place to start because I think it's a great representative of the blending of genres. There's a lot of different genres being mixed together in The Wailing. And if you do watch it and feel like it's taking its time, maybe you are having a little bit of restlessness or whatever, have no fear. It does come together fantastic at the end. Again, not going to spoil it, but it really, really hits. So if you've seen The Wailing, give me your thoughts on that. Tell me what you think of it. But if you haven't seen it yet, please give it a chance. Check it out. Come back here and let us know what you think, because I absolutely love the film. I'm not alone in that effusive praise. So I think you guys are going to like it a lot. The next movie we're talking about today, our graduate level movie, is Train to Busan. Train to Busan also came out in 2016. Looks like that was a really good year for Korean horror. And it would probably be easiest described as Zombies on a Train, which in and of itself might have been a pretty good title. If you haven't seen Train to Busan, I'm not kidding. It really is zombies on a train. A man takes his young daughter onto a train ride. The train gets overtaken by zombies and hijinks abound. It is phenomenal. I'm going to say it again, phenomenal. Now, if you haven't seen the movie and you've seen a lot of zombie movies, you might be kind of saying or thinking to yourself, another zombie movie. I'm played out, tapped out on the zombie movies. Me too. That's what I said. When this movie came out, I had my fill of zombie movies. The market had been flooded with zombie movies, and it takes a lot for a zombie movie to rise above the chaff on that. We've talked about this before with some other zombie movies that make the syllabus, because you have to do a lot to really stand apart from the crowd. Train to Busan does it. It's one of the best zombie movies I've ever seen. And that's not faint praise. We haven't gotten to the zombie subgenre yet. We will. And you'll see, I broke it into two subgenres because, you got the Romero classics and then there's so many other ones to talk about. But Train to Busan didn't make it into either of those subgenres because, A, I wanted to put it here as one of the best Korean horror films, but also just to show you that there is a lot of actual competition. There are a lot of zombie movies that I do think are really, really good. And I'm still telling you, Train to Busan, one of the best. I cheated maybe by not putting it into the zombie subgenre and putting it here, but because I think it is one of the best Korean horror movies as well, I'm going to give myself a pass on that. The movie winds up being an awesome zombie movie simply by having two main things in it that so many other zombie movies fail to capture. One is genuine human drama, primarily from the father and his daughter, but also with other side characters that you get to know on the train before the hijinks abound. And two, from being unrelentingly action packed. There's a lot of zombie movies out there that have a lot of great zombie action. 28 Days Later comes to mind off the top of my head. Train to Busan puts it all to shame. Once this movie gets going, and it gets going pretty quick, it doesn't stop. It's just bam, bam, bam. It gives you just enough time to breathe and just enough time to just to catch your breath, really, before the next big action set piece, but before the next scare fest, next gore fest, that it gives you that it doesn't overwhelm you, and it gives you enough character beats along the way that it's not just a straight zombie film. Once again, it's Korean, so it's blending a bunch of different things together. It's got a lot of really great fun moments, funny moments. It's got that human drama that I was telling you about before. It's got that action, and it's got genuine horror, both in terms of gore and in terms of tension. So once again, perfectly balanced blending of genres makes it feel fresh and exciting and original. Even though you've seen zombies on a whatever plenty of times, I guarantee you, Train to Busan's gonna feel fresh to you. It's gonna feel like a zombie movie you haven't seen before. The movie got a lot of buzz. It was a big hit. It was a big hit here, so much so that they've done an animated prequel and then a sequel, but a sequel that's kind of like in the same universe, not actually a direct sequel to the characters from Train to Busan, and they're not as good, if I'm being honest with you. And that's not so much criticism of them. It's not that they're bad movies by any stretch of the imagination. It's that the Train to Busan is just, it's next level. It's a gold standard both in Korean horror and in zombie movies. And so the sequels or the prequel and sequel by default fall short. But they're worth your time. If you like the Train to Busan original, then definitely check out is it Peninsula is the sequel, and I think it's Seoul Station is the animated prequel. Check them out. They're definitely worth your time, but manage your expectations. Don't go in hoping to get more Train to Busan level amazingness, because then you might feel a little you might feel a little bit disappointed if that's the case. And I'd rather you kind of go in with fresh eyes. But by all means, if you haven't seen Train to Busan, you gotta check it out. If you like zombies at all, this is a must see for you. And I will pretty much guarantee that you're going to like this movie. And if you're interested in Korean horror, this is also, I'd say, a must see. It's one of the best examples of it out there. It's just so much fun, so exciting and scary and nail biting and funny and heart wrenching that you're bound to like it. It's got something for everybody in there. So unless you've got an aversion to zombie movies, and you know what, even if you do have an aversion to zombie movies, check it out anyways, because again, it's such a cut above the average zombie movie that, well, you just have to kind of see it to really fully understand just how great it actually is. So again, if you haven't seen it, but please check it out and let us know what you think. And if you have seen Train to Busan, give us your thoughts below in the comments. I always like to hear what you guys' thoughts are on this. And if you think I'm being a little too effusive, go ahead and let us know why you think maybe it's not as great as I think it is. But I have a feeling you probably do. The last movie we're talking about today, the postgraduate level movie, is Parasite. Best Picture Parasite. And not just Best Foreign Picture, Best Picture Parasite. I just want to just let that sink in about how big a deal it is that a Korean horror film won the Best Picture Oscar. That's a big, big deal. And I said horror film, and that's the thing that I think a lot of people would probably push back on, is calling Parasite a horror film. And it's a fair argument. But it's a fair argument because of what we've already talked about, Korean cinema and the blending of genres. Because if you've seen Parasite, particularly if you've seen Parasite all the way through, I think you can agree with me, it deserves to be called a horror film. If you haven't seen Parasite yet, first, shame on you. Secondly, the story is about a lower class family that finds a way into the house of a upper class family by taking on various servant roles in the household. And the movie focuses on kind of the class warfare between these two classes. And to say anything more than that would be a disservice to you and to the movie, because you should really let it unfold on your own. This movie obviously had a lot of hype around it, culminating in an Academy Award. And if you haven't seen it, but you've seen the hype and you think that the movie's overhyped, I'm here to say it's not. I'm here to say that this movie deserves every bit of hype that it got, every bit of praise that it got, and every award that it got. The movie is darn near perfect, if I'm being honest with you. It is incredibly well directed, more on that in a minute, incredibly well acted, incredibly well shot, incredibly well written. Every single aspect of the movie is at a 10. It's just working in every single possible way. And that's no small feat for any movie, but in particular for this movie because of the blending of genres. Like a lot of the other movies we're talking about here, Parasite is incredibly hilarious, incredibly sad, incredibly spooky, and incredibly frustrating all at the same time, weaving in and out from these different emotions. The movie goes in places that you're not seeing coming, even though I'm telling you the movie's a horror movie, and so you'll be bracing yourself for some horrific elements. You're still not going to see where this movie is going, and that's awesome. The aspects of this movie that I really love are first and foremost the acting across the board. Phenomenal acting. We've talked about this before when I've mentioned Korean horror or just foreign horror in general. If you can, watch the movie with subtitles. Don't watch a dubbed version of it because it's really great to be able to appreciate the performances of the actors in their natural language. And even though you don't speak the language, the performance comes through. You could maybe not even have the subtitles on and still probably understand what is happening from the tones in their voice, from the looks on their faces, from their body language, from the rhythm of how they speak. It all comes through. And I do think that even with the best dubs, you lose some of that aspect. So I implore you to watch with subtitles if and when you can. So that is a key aspect of what this movie does so successfully. But the other thing about it is the direction. Now, the director is Bong Joon-Ho, and he won Best Director, deservedly so, for this movie. We've talked about him before, most recently with The Host. The man is a phenomenal director, and this is his crowning achievement. It is a master class of directing. There are a lot of YouTube videos that go into detail about just how well this movie's put together, how incredible the shots are. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it here, but I would encourage you, if you've seen the movie and you like the movie, to explore some of those videos because it takes your appreciation of the film to a whole other level. The way that Bong is doing this movie and separating out the poor family from the rich family, not just in terms of narrative, but also in terms of visual, by literally dividing them off, by literally having a line between them throughout the movie, is phenomenal. It's like this psychological, subliminal message being sent to the viewer that there is this divide between the two that you cannot cross over, even though that's what the movie is all about. It hits so well. And most of us probably don't even notice it. I'll tell you right now, I'll be honest, I didn't notice it until I saw some of these YouTube videos. But it's such a great, subtle visual trick to underscore the themes of the movie, and it works so incredibly well. The movie's themes of class warfare or class distinction are very, very poignant. Now, that's a Korean culture issue that translates extremely well to today's America. So I think that's a big part of why this movie was such a hit in America, why it resonated so well with both critics and audiences, is that it resonates with today's society in America and the class warfare and class distinctions going on today in America. So that's an interesting thing about the movie as well. It's a foreign film that makes a fantastic commentary on American culture without even really probably trying to do so. But it makes the movie hit all that much more for an American audience. So there's a lot here for a viewer to unpack. And I've kind of undersold some of the comedy in the movie. There's a lot of funny stuff in this movie. A lot. And like I said, it'll veer from comedy to drama to horror. Boom, 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 really fast. But I promise you, you'll just be along for the ride. You won't feel disoriented or confused. You will just be locked in on this movie. And by the end of it, you'll realize you've gone on a ride and that it was wonderful. The best way that I can praise Parasite is that my wife watched it with me because of all the buzz, because it was nominated for an Oscar. And she is not a horror fan, and I'll be honest with you, I didn't call it a horror movie when I showed it to her. But she loved the movie. She was locked in. She was so into it. She was really, really fascinated by it. She absolutely loved it. And my wife is not a big cinephile in general. And again, not a horror aficionado in the slightest. And for her to enjoy this movie as much as she did tells me that pretty much anybody can connect with it and enjoy it. So that is why I am not only effusive about my praise in it, but I am boldly saying that it's like an incredible movie that everybody could enjoy, that everybody should see, regardless of what kind of movies you like, regardless of whether or not you know anything about Korea, regardless of whether or not you like subtitles. You should just see this movie anyways. It's that good. It's that well made. It hits that well. It's got that good of a connection. Yeah, if you haven't seen Parasite, you've got to check it out. You know what? Don't let the overhype dissuade you. See it anyways. Make up your own mind. And once you've got your decision, you've got your mind made up, come tell us about it in the comments. Like I said, we've been talking a lot in the comments about things, and I welcome dissenting opinions too. If you think I'm a little overhyped, if you think Parasite's overhyped, or if I'm overhyping it particularly, let us know your opinion, man. We will respect you, of course. But I am boldly saying you're going to like, if not love, Parasite. So those are my three picks for the horror movie syllabus for the Korean subgenre of horror. But we're going to talk about some awesome extra credit movies. The first movie I'm going to talk about is called I Saw the Devil. And this movie, amongst the horror fans and action fans, has a reputation of being a really intense, really great movie, and it is well deserved. This movie is awesome. The storyline is pretty simplistic in concept. A cop's wife is murdered by a serial killer, so he is hunting the serial killer down. But rather than just trying to catch him, he's trying to torment him and basically flip the game on him, where he's hunting the serial killer and the serial killer feels like prey. And it's fantastic. I saw this movie with incredibly high expectations, and it actually still managed to exceed those expectations. It's a long movie, but it's unrelenting and it's incredibly violent. Incredibly violent. So it may not be for everybody. A lot of the Korean movies have some shocking violence in them. This one really kind of high up there in terms of the violence level. And honestly, a lot of people might want to quibble about whether or not this is a horror film as well, because it really leans more into the thriller, police procedural type aspect. And we haven't gotten to thriller movies quite yet, and I've touched on this a little bit in previous videos, that the difference between a thriller and a horror has a clear distinction in my mind, but a lot of people kind of see what I would call a thriller as a horror movie, and this is one where I'm kind of the other way around. I see it as a horror movie, even though some people might see it as a thriller. Again, a lot of action, a lot of police stuff in here, but some really horrific scenes, some really incredibly horrific violence in this movie. But it's an intense ride. It's an intense trip. Intense is the word that I keep coming to when I think of this movie, because I watched this movie really late at night, like at 2 a.m, and I was just wired afterwards. I couldn't go to sleep. It's just such an adrenaline rush, but it's an incredible ride. If you like this kind of movie, if you like serial killers, cops and investigations, action, gore, violent movies, this is definitely in your wheelhouse. So if you haven't seen it, check it out. The next extra credit movie I'm going to mention is Thirst, which is a Korean vampire film directed by Park Chan-wook. And we've talked about Park before when we talked about Stoker. And he's also the director of the infamous, noteworthy Old Boy, which some of you may have heard of before. And if you haven't, check that out. But Thirst is, like I said, it's a Korean vampire film. And it does feel like a very fresh take on the vampire mythology. Now, again, I don't know anything about Korean culture, so maybe in Korea, this is the vampire mythology. But in America, this is a little different, or actually kind of a lot different than what we think of when we think of vampires. Once again, like other Korean movies, it tends to blend genres, but it does primarily focus on the vampire subgenre. And I know you'll note I didn't put it in the vampire subgenre. I do love me some vampire movies, so you've noted maybe that I've squeezed vampire movies into other subgenres when I can just to make room for more of them, and this is probably one of those examples. That said, I do think it is an excellent representation of a vampire horror movie. It's a fresh take on the vampire mythos. It's got some incredible performances, and it's really strange. It's a strange movie, and I mean that in a good way. This movie was kind of what I was expecting when I heard about it, and also not what I was expecting. And that was fun because I came to the movie a little on the later side. I saw this well after it kind of gotten the buzz. And it did live up to the buzz, but not in the way I expected. And that was a great thing. It was a revelation for me to watch this movie. I really, really liked it. If you like vampire movies, I definitely recommend it. But even if you just like really interesting offbeat horror movies or movies with a weird body horror, this would also be your jam as well. So definitely check this one out if you're into those kind of things, because this one is good. The last extra credit Korean movie I'm going to talk about today is called A Tale of Two Sisters. And A Tale of Two Sisters is directed by the same person who directed I Saw the Devil, but a very different tone film. This one's much more of a slow burn movie. And I'll be honest with you, it takes a little while to get into it. The story is about two sisters that come back to their home. There's been some past family drama, and they're trying to work their way past it. And to say anything more than that would be to spoil the movie. And the movie hinges a lot on mystery. The mystery is good too. It's a compelling mystery that kept me really locked in and engaged. And again, because it's Korean, there's kind of a blending of different genres. There's a lot of, and again, I don't want to spoil too much of the movie, so I don't want to talk about too many of the subgenres that are kind of getting blended together here. But suffice to say, there is mystery, there's horror, there's drama, and it's all working together like the Korean movies tend to do. And this one in particular, like I said, it took a little while to get going. But once it clicked in for me, I was riveted. I was really, really into it. Once again, the movie is beautifully shot, just like all of these movies. And that makes the slow burn aspect to it not matter so much, because you're still seeing great camera work. You're still seeing great visuals. You're still seeing great sets and wonderful performances. And that always kind of is the foundation for these movies, that they're so well made that they can take their time telling the story. And this movie does take its time, but it works really, really, really well. They did do an American remake of this movie called The Uninvited that is forgettable. I saw it. The movie itself made no impression on me whatsoever, but this original does. So if you're going to do something, check out the original. Don't waste your time with the American remake. It's a really good slow burn mystery movie. Less scary, I'd say, than the vast majority of the other movies we've talked about here, and maybe a little less graphic, but some disturbing concepts being explored here. Again, there are kids involved, so think about that. But definitely a recommend from me for A Tale of Two Sisters. If you haven't seen it, give it a chance. And that's going to do it for our exploration into Korean horror movies. I was very excited to get this one. I hope you guys have enjoyed it as much as I have. If you're a fan of Korean horror, leave some comments for us in the comment section below. If you're new to Korean horror, this is a great starting point for you. Like I said at the beginning of the video, I love all of these movies. They're all fabulous. Every single one of them is well worth your time. And if Korean horror is not your thing, that's okay. You know, it's okay that you don't have the same opinion as me. You don't love these things. It doesn't mean you're not a horror fan, or you're not true horror or whatever like that. You guys saw my video recently about Leprechaun and how I feel about horror gatekeeping. I am a big fan of all fans are welcome. So if Korean is not your thing, no problem. Hey, let us know why. But if you've never really tried it out, or if you only tried it once or something like that, try one of these movies out. Give it another chance. See if you guys like it, because I stand by my feeling that it's really something else, man. It's really something fresh and original and interesting and exciting. And, if you get past the titles, and if you can get past, the different culture stuff, I think there's a lot here for you to like. So try being open-minded, try checking out Korean horror. With that, I want to thank all of you guys for your attendance today and for your continued comments and viewing. Really appreciate all of you guys. With that, we're calling it a day. Class dismissed.